Jack had been assigned to a diplomatic mission on the distant planet of Xenos, a place where humans had barely made a foothold. The aliens there were peaceful and had only recently opened their borders to outsiders, hoping for more trade opportunities. As the human envoy, Jack was expected to not only facilitate talks but to maintain a sense of composure and professionalism. He had one goal: to make Earth's first official contact with the Xenosians as smooth and dignified as possible. Things, of course, didn't go as planned. Jack's first day on the planet was one disaster after another. First, his translator malfunctioned during a crucial meeting. Then, the Xenosian officials misunderstood every gesture he made, thinking that a polite nod was a form of aggression. It wasn't long before Jack's patience wore thin, and he found himself needing a break from the chaos. So, he retreated to his quarters for some much-needed solitude. The moment he stepped inside, he was greeted by two very unusual figures. Arwyel and Ceres, twin bodyguards assigned to him by the Xenosian government. Both women were strikingly beautiful, tall, with skin that shimmered a shade of blue Jack couldn't quite place. They were dressed in sleek, form-fitting uniforms that made them look like something out of a high-budget space opera. Despite their intimidating appearance, Jack had already learned that they were both remarkably polite and professional, until now. He had barely taken off his jacket when the doors slid open, and there they were, Arwyel and Ceres, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Oh! Sorry!" Arwyel blurted out, her wide, alien eyes growing even wider. She quickly turned around, but not before Jack caught a glimpse of her confused expression. Ceres was right behind her, looking equally flustered. "I didn't know." Ceres started, but her words were drowned out by the sound of the door automatically sliding shut behind her. Jack froze, trying to process what had just happened. He was standing there, half naked, with two very alien women, who clearly didn't know how to handle the situation. No problem," Jack said, quickly pulling his shirt back on. "Just a misunderstanding." But it wasn't just a misunderstanding. The twins were staring at him with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Their heads tilted slightly, their eyes flickering over him in ways that made Jack distinctly uncomfortable. He tried to focus on his pants, but the situation was getting more bizarre by the second. "Well," he stammered, trying to keep his voice steady, "I guess this is awkward. But no harm done." Both twins remained silent, not saying a word. They didn't seem to understand why Jack was embarrassed. In fact, they seemed intrigued. Arwyel cleared her throat awkwardly. "Humans, they don't wear clothes in private?" She sounded like she was asking for clarification, but it was more like a genuine inquiry. She and Ceres had no idea how human modesty worked. Clearly, nudity was either a foreign concept or simply didn't carry the same weight on Xenos as it did on Earth. "Well, we do," Jack muttered, suddenly very aware of the temperature in the room. "It's just, well, I didn't think I'd have company." "Ah," Ceres said, her eyes flicking to Jack's bare arms. "We've never seen a human before. So, your skin, it's different." Jack could tell they were doing their best to be polite, but he had never felt more self-conscious in his life. The awkward silence stretched on as they both tried to make sense of human anatomy. Jack tried to laugh it off, but it wasn't easy when the twins were clearly fascinated by every inch of his body. "You, want to ask anything else?" Jack asked, hoping to diffuse the tension. Arwyel blinked. "Is it normal for humans to, have different parts? Like what you call a chest?" "Oh, the chest. Yeah, that's normal. Every human has one," Jack said quickly, trying to get them to stop dissecting his anatomy with their eyes. But no matter what he said, Arwyel and Ceres kept looking at him like they had just stumbled upon a new species in the wild. Jack realized they probably had no idea what modesty even was. Ceres, still unsure of how to proceed, finally asked, "And your body parts? They are functional, like ours?" Jack blinked in confusion. "What do you mean by functional?" Arwyel raised an eyebrow, clearly not understanding his hesitation. "Do they serve a purpose in your interactions?" Jack felt his cheeks turn red. He wasn't sure if they were genuinely interested or just trying to figure out the mechanics of human biology. Either way, he wasn't ready to discuss it with two strangers. Especially not two women who had accidentally seen him in his most vulnerable state. He stammered, "Yeah, they serve a purpose, but it's a bit complicated. You see," Saris continued, "we understand mating rituals, but we have not studied humans in this way. It is a bit confusing." That was an understatement. Jack tried to gather his thoughts. He was an Anva, not a biology teacher. And yet, here he was, standing half-dressed in his quarters with two alien women, who were now seemingly intent on learning about human sexuality. "Well," Jack began, "I think it's probably best we just stick to the mission for now. There's, no need to." But RYL wasn't finished. "You see, in our culture, when we find something interesting, we explore it. Is that what humans do?" Jack blinked rapidly, realizing exactly where this conversation was going. Well, humans, we don't usually just explore, things like that." He shifted uncomfortably, still hoping that somehow this would all make sense. Saris gave a slow, calculating look, and Jack realized that despite their naivety, these two were still incredibly sharp. "So you are telling us that you do not want us to help you understand how we interact with our bodies?" No, I'm good, thank you," Jack said quickly, stepping back and hoping this would end soon. "I think I need some time alone." But neither RYL nor Saris moved. They stared at him with a mix of confusion and something else, something more intense. Jack wasn't sure what it was, but it was making his stomach flip. Before he could say anything else, Saris spoke again. "Maybe if you need help later, we can teach you our ways." She sounded completely sincere, making the offer like it was just another part of their cultural exchange. RYL added, "We have many ways of showing affection. Maybe you'd like to know them better?" Jack suddenly realized he was in much deeper than he had anticipated. What had started as an innocent diplomatic mission was rapidly turning into something entirely different. And as much as he tried to redirect the conversation, he wasn't sure how long he could keep this up. The days that followed only became more complicated. Jack had hoped that the accidental exposure in his quarters would be a one-time incident, an awkward misunderstanding that would quickly blow over. But he quickly realized that RYL and Saris were not the type to let things slide. Every time he saw them, they'd greet him with those same wide-eyed expressions, as if they were studying him like some kind of rare specimen. Their curiosity hadn't waned, in fact, it had only grown. Every conversation seemed to veer into territory Jack wasn't prepared to handle. It started with innocent questions about human customs, but as time went on, their inquiries grew more pointed. "Jack," Saris asked one morning, catching him off guard in the hallway, "tell me about your relationships." Jack raised an eyebrow, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "You know," she said, her voice casual but with an intensity behind it. "With others. What do humans do to connect?" Jack felt his face flush. He didn't expect to be discussing his romantic life with two alien women, especially after the whole naked debacle. He cleared his throat, trying to find the right words. "Well, humans, usually start with talking. We go on dates, get to know each other, emotional stuff." RYL, who had been standing silently beside Saris, chimed in. "So you do not just connect physically? Is it not the same?" Jack's eyes widened. "Not exactly. Humans, have emotional connections first. We build trust." RYL looked puzzled. "Trust? So you don't just act on your instincts?" She glanced at Saris, then back at Jack. "We thought humans were spontaneous." Jack forced a nervous laugh. "We are just not like that." The twins exchanged a look that Jack couldn't quite read, but it wasn't exactly comforting. The more he tried to explain human relationships, the more confused they seemed to get. And worse, Jack couldn't help but feel that their curiosity was turning into something else, something deeper. Every glance, every touch seemed a little too lingering, a little too intimate. Later that day, as he sat down to eat, RYL approached him with a bowl of alien food. She offered it to him with a strange smile. "Jack, would you like to try this?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "We've learned that humans like new experiences. This is a delicacy on Xenos." Jack eyed the bowl warily. It looked harmless enough, some kind of gelatinous, brightly colored substance, but he had learned by now not to take any alien food at face value. Sure," he said, forcing a smile. "Why not?" He took a small bite, and immediately, his body reacted. It was unlike anything he'd ever tasted, sweet, spicy, and strangely intoxicating. His senses tingled, and for a moment he felt different. His heart rate picked up, and his body temperature rose. He suddenly became hyper-aware of RYL and Saris standing just a few feet away, watching him closely. RYL smiled knowingly, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "We heard that human males enjoy a bit of excitement now and then. Does it feel good?" Jack's stomach flipped. "What did you give me?" he asked, trying to sound calm, but his voice betrayed him. "It's an aphrodisiac," Saris said matter-of-factly. "We thought it might help you relax." "Relax?" Jack repeated, trying to focus through the sudden haze in his mind. His body was betraying him, his heart pounding faster, and his thoughts clouded with an unexplainable urge. This wasn't just some simple alien delicacy, it was something else entirely. Before he could gather his thoughts, RYL leaned in closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you feeling the effect?" Her touch sent a jolt through him, and for a split second, Jack wondered if it was the food or something else entirely. I think I need to sit down," Jack muttered, standing up a little too quickly, his body still reacting to the strange substance. Saris' eyes glinted with amusement. "It's okay, Jack. It's normal. We can help you process it." Jack could feel the heat rising in his face. He was in way over his head. I think I'm fine," he stammered, trying to back away. "I just need some space, okay?" But the twins didn't move. Instead, they followed him, their eyes locked on him with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something he wasn't sure how to interpret. "Jack," RYL said softly, her voice almost teasing, "if you want to learn more about Xenosian culture, you need to open yourself to new experiences." Saris added, "It's not just about your body. It's about understanding us." Jack didn't know how to respond. His mind was swirling. He had been sent here to represent Earth, to maintain diplomatic relations, but now, it felt like the mission had become something else entirely. The twins were no longer just his bodyguards, they were his constant companions, and their fascination with him was no longer innocent. He had thought he could handle this, maintain the distance, keep things professional. But with each day, the lines blurred more and more. The tension was palpable, thickening the air between them, and Jack couldn't escape it. Not when they were around, watching him with those wide, unblinking eyes, always seeming to wait for something he wasn't ready to give. The more he tried to resist, the more they seemed determined to push him to his limits. Jack had become the center of their curiosity, their fascination, and their desire to understand him in ways he wasn't prepared for. He knew he was in deep now, and there was no turning back. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that things were slipping out of his control. Each day with RYL and Saris felt like walking a fine line between maintaining professionalism and resisting the growing tension that seemed to follow them wherever they went. They had made it clear, through their curious glances, their questions, their strange attempts to help him, that they were no longer just bodyguards. They were interested in him, in a way he wasn't sure how to handle. And the worst part? Jack wasn't entirely sure if he wanted them to stop. It had started innocently enough, the occasional flirtatious comment, the lingering glances, and the all-too-frequent offers to help him with tasks that didn't quite need assistance. But now it was clear, RYL and Saris were more than just curious about him. They were fascinated by human intimacy, and their fascination had morphed into something deeper, something that Jack wasn't sure how to navigate. One evening, Jack found himself alone with RYL. Saris had left to attend to some official duties, leaving Jack and RYL in the quiet of his quarters. At first, it felt normal, almost routine. But there was a palpable shift in the air. RYL wasn't just standing there, she was studying him, her eyes darting between him and his surroundings like she was trying to decipher something he couldn't see. Jack, she began, her voice softer than usual. Do you find our planet confusing? Jack raised an eyebrow, trying to mask the unease creeping into his chest. A little. I mean, you guys have different customs, but I'm starting to get the hang of it. RYL smiled, though there was something enigmatic about it. It's not just the customs that confuse you, is it? Her gaze lingered on him, her eyes scanning him slowly, as though she was dissecting every inch of him. I can tell that you're uncomfortable, but also curious. Jack shifted in his seat, his palms suddenly sweating. What do you mean by that? He asked, keeping his voice even. You're drawn to us, she said, stepping a little closer. We've sensed it. And you're not just curious about our culture, are you? You're curious about us. Jack's breath hitched. He tried to laugh it off, but the nervousness in his stomach made his laugh sound weak. I think you're reading too much into this. I'm just here to do my job. RYL's eyes narrowed slightly, but her smile didn't falter. We understand that, she said softly. But we're also here, with you. And we're not just some diplomatic duty. We want to know you, Jack. More than you realize. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jack's heart rate increased, and despite himself, he felt the warmth of attraction beginning to mix with a strange sense of panic. He wasn't sure how to respond. These weren't the questions he'd expected to be asked when he signed up for a diplomatic mission. You're human, RYL continued, her voice a bit more insistent now. And yet, you're so different from us. Your body, your mind, even your emotions. She took another step closer, her presence overwhelming in its intensity. Tell me, Jack, is it true what they say about humans? That you can connect deeply? Jack swallowed hard. I think you're getting the wrong idea, he said, trying to keep his voice steady, but failing. RYL had crossed the line, and now he wasn't sure how to back out without making things worse. No, she said, shaking her head. I don't think I am. We've seen the way you look at us. And we've seen how you react when we touch you. Jack's eyes widened. That wasn't... I know, RYL interrupted gently. It wasn't intentional. But we're not blind, Jack. We see the way your heart races when we're close. The way you hesitate when we ask you personal things. It was true. Jack had noticed it too, the subtle way his body responded to their proximity, the fluttering in his chest whenever one of them touched him, even accidentally. He couldn't explain it, but the more time he spent around them, the more he couldn't deny the attraction that was building between them. But it was complicated. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. He wasn't sure if he was even able to navigate what was happening. He was a diplomat, for God's sake. He couldn't let this distract him from the mission. And yet, every day, RYL and Saris were making it harder and harder to stay professional. RYL's voice broke through his thoughts, low and steady. I think you want to know us, Jack. Not just for our knowledge or our culture, but for something more. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his arm. The touch sent a jolt through him, making his heart skip. I don't know what you mean, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. RYL's smile was almost predatory now. You do. You just don't want to admit it. The room felt smaller somehow, and Jack found it harder to breathe. The air between them was thick with unspoken things he wasn't sure he could control. He wanted to pull away, to end this conversation, but a part of him didn't want to. That part of him was curious too, just like the twins. But he couldn't let this go any further. It would be too dangerous. He was here to represent humanity, not to get tangled up in alien complications. But before he could say anything, Saris appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Is everything okay? She asked, her tone calm but with an edge of concern. Jack quickly stepped back, his mind racing to regain control of the situation. Yeah, everything's fine. Just talking. RYL didn't seem bothered by Saris's presence, and in fact, she didn't move away. We're just discussing human connections, RYL said, her gaze still locked on Jack. It's fascinating how complex your species is. Saris nodded, but Jack could see the slight flicker of something in her eyes. Jealousy? Interest? He couldn't tell, but the tension in the room was palpable. Well, Jack, Saris said, her voice even. We've learned a lot from you, I think. Jack forced a smile. Glad to be of service, he said, but even to his own ears it sounded forced. As the twins turned to leave, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. But just before the door closed, Saris glanced back at him. Don't worry, Jack. We'll figure this out. You're not the only one who's curious. And with that, the door slid shut behind them, leaving Jack standing there, his heart still racing, unsure of where things would go from here. The tension that had been building for the past few days reached its peak when Jack found himself face to face with both RYL and Saris in his quarters once again. This time, there was no avoiding it, no escaping the tension that had been simmering between them. The usual awkwardness was gone, replaced by something far more direct and undeniable. He could feel it in the way they looked at him, in the silence that hung in the air. Jack, RYL said, her voice low. We need to talk. Jack's stomach tightened. He had been hoping to avoid this conversation, to somehow navigate around the growing feelings between them. But it was clear now that the moment had arrived. The twins weren't going to back down. He could see the determination in their eyes, the certainty in their stance. They weren't just curious anymore. They had crossed a line, and now they were asking him to cross it with them. Look, Jack started, but RYL held up a hand, silencing him. No, Jack. We're not asking for permission. We're not asking for you to explain yourself anymore, she said, stepping closer. We're telling you. You can't deny what's happening here. Jack swallowed hard. He had never been more unsure of what to do. He had never been more aware of the way his body reacted to their presence. His mind told him to keep things professional, to push the feelings aside. But everything about this situation screamed that he couldn't. Not anymore. Saris moved in beside RYL, her gaze steady and unwavering. We're not like humans, Jack. We don't hide our feelings. We don't play games. And we certainly don't pretend that we don't feel things when we do. Jack shook his head, trying to make sense of the overwhelming emotions swirling inside him. This isn't right, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm here to represent Earth, not to get involved in this. But you are involved, RYL said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Whether you want to admit it or not, you're already a part of this. You're a part of us. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. And you don't have to be afraid of it, Jack. You don't have to hide. Jack opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. He couldn't deny the connection he felt. It was there, undeniable, something he had been trying to ignore for days. He had tried to focus on the mission, to remind himself that he was here to build bridges, not to cross personal boundaries. But the more time he spent with them, the more those boundaries blurred. The more he felt drawn to them, the more he realized that he couldn't push them away. I don't know what to do, Jack admitted, his voice strained. This is too much. RYL took another step closer, and this time, Jack didn't move away. He felt the heat radiating off her, felt the pull between them, the attraction that neither of them could deny any longer. You don't have to do anything, Jack, RYL said, her voice soft and soothing. You just have to let it happen. Let us show you what we can be together. Saris nodded, her expression serious. We don't expect you to understand all of this right away. But we're not asking for your rejection. We're asking for your trust. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, trying to clear his mind. He couldn't think straight. He had spent days trying to push this away, trying to focus on his duty. But now, in this moment, everything else seemed irrelevant. The diplomatic mission, The planet, even Earth, all of it felt distant, as though it was no longer the priority. His focus had shifted. And it wasn't just about the attraction anymore. It was about something deeper, something he wasn't sure he fully understood yet, but that he couldn't ignore. "I don't want to hurt you," Jack said, his voice quieter now. I don't want to make a mistake." "You're not making a mistake," Sarah said, her voice firm but gentle. "The only mistake would be ignoring what's right in front of you. Ignoring what we all feel." Jack took a deep breath, his chest tightening with a mix of anxiety and something else, something that made him realize just how much he had been holding back. He had been so focused on keeping control, on maintaining boundaries, that he had never allowed himself to just feel. But here, now, with the twins standing before him, he realized that maybe he didn't need to control everything. Maybe it was okay to let go. "I don't know what's going to happen next," Jack said, finally meeting their gazes. "But I can't deny this connection. I just don't want to regret it." Arwyel smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "You won't regret it, Jack. We'll make sure of that." Sarah's expression softened, and she reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this, Jack. We're with you. And we'll help you figure it out." The weight that had been hanging over Jack's chest lifted slightly, but he still felt a sense of unease. This wasn't going to be easy, and there were no guarantees. But for the first time in days, he felt like maybe he could let go of the fear, let go of the uncertainty, and just let himself experience whatever this was. They had crossed a line. But maybe that was just the beginning. Maybe it was time to stop fighting what felt so natural and just see where it took them. With a final glance at Arwyel and Saris, Jack realized that, despite everything, he wasn't ready to walk away. The pull between them was too strong, and it wasn't just about physical attraction. There was something deeper there, something real. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but at least for now, he was willing to find out. The doors slid shut behind them, and Jack exhaled a shaky breath. Things were far from simple now, but he knew one thing for sure: the mission had changed. And so had he.